Hello and welcome back to the fifth part of the history of the education, and we was discussing about the Chinese education system, and now we are completing this education series from the around to the 13th century until the latter part of the 19th century. The three character classic, which is the embodiment of the Confucian thought suitable for the teaching to the young children, survive to the children's first formal education at home. The text is written in the triplets of the characters for the easy memorization, which is illiterately common for the most people at that time. The oral tradition of the reciting the classical encouraged its popularity and the survival through the centuries with a short and the simple text arranged in the three character verses. Okay, and children learn many common characters, grammar, structure, elements of the Chinese history, and the basics of Confucian morality. After learning Chinese characters, students wishing to absent in the social hierarchy needed to study the Chinese classical text, and the early Chinese state depended upon the illiterate, educated official for the operation of the empire. In 605 AD, during the Sui dynasty, and for the first time, the examination center was experimentally instituted for a category of the local talents. The merit-based empirical examination system was for the evaluating and selecting officials gave rise to the schools that taught the Chinese classical text and they continued to the use for the 1300 years until the end of the Qing dynasty, being abolished in 911 in the favor of the Western education methods. The core of the curriculum for the empirical civil service examination from the favor of the Western education method. The core of the curriculum for the empirical civil service examination from the mid 12th century onward, with the four books representing of fundamental introduction to Confucianism. Okay, and theoretically, any male adult in the China, regardless of his wealth or the social status, could become a high-ranking government official by passing the empirical examination. Although under some dynasties, members of the merchant classes were excluded in reality, since the process of studying for the examination tended to be time consuming and consumed and the mostly costly. If tutors were hired, more of the candidates came from the numerically small but relatively wealthy land-owning community. And however, there are the vast number of the examples in the Chinese history with the individuals moved from a low social status to the political performance through the success in the empirical examination. Under some of the dynasties, in the empirical examination was abolished and the official post was simply sold, which increased corruption and reduced morale. In the period preceding 1040 to the 1050 AD, prefectural schools had been neglected by the state and left to the devices of the wealthy patrons who provided private finances. The chancellor of the China at the time, Fan Zhongyan, issued an edict that would have used a combination of the government funding, the private financing to the restore and rebuild all professional and prefectural schools that had fallen into disuse and abandon. He also attempted to restore all country level schools in the same manner, but did not resignate where funds for the effort would be formally acquired, and the decree and the decree was not taken seriously until a later period. Fans tend of the government funding for the education set in motion the movement of the public schools that eclipsed the private academics, which would not be officially retrieved until the mid 13th century. The first Now we are discussing about about India's education system. The first Malaysian and the few centuries preceding its side, the flourishing of the higher education in the land, and Takashli University, Yujan, and Vikri Mashla universities. Among the subjects taught for the art, architecture, painting, logic, mathematics, grammar, about the philosophy, about astronomy, literature, about the Buddhism and Hinduism, and Arthashastra, economics and politics, law and medicine, etc. Each university specialized in a particular field of study. Takshila specialized in the study of medicine, while Yujan laid emphasis on astronomy, and Nalanda, being the biggest center that handled all branches of the knowledge and housed up to 10,000 students at its peak. And Mahadevra, another important center of the Buddhist learning in India, was established by the King Dharpapla in the response to a supposed decline in the quality of the scholarship in Nalanda. Major work in the fields of the mathematics, astronomy, and the physics were done by Aryabhata. Approximations of the pi, basic trigonometric education, intermediate education, and positional notation are mentioned in Aryabhata, which is Mengemopisium, and only known was surviving work of the 5th century Indian education and Indian mathematicians and mathematics. So the work was translated into Arabic around 820 CE by Al-Khwarizmi. Now we are discussing about the Hindu education. Even during the Middle Ages, education in India was imparted orally. Education was provided to the individuals free of cost. It was considered holy and honorable to do so. The ruling king did not provide any funds for education, but it was people belonging to the Hindus religion who donated for the preservation of the Hindus education. The centers of the Hindus learning, uh, which were the universities, were set up in places where the scholars resident. These places also became places of the privilege, so more pilgrims funded their instructions and illustrations for this holy purpose. And Islamic education was a major contribution for this education system. Now we are discussing about the Islamic education, and by the way, Islamic education is one of the fundamental education for the whole world's beneficiary and basic education. uh, we are discussing about Islamic education, and after Muslims started ruling India, there was a rise in the spread of the Islamic education. The main aim of the Islamic education is including the acquisition of the knowledge, progression of the Islam and Islamic social morals, preservation and the spread of the Muslim culture. Etc. Education was mainly imparted through the maktabs, madrasas, and mosques. Their education was usually funded by the noble or the landlords. The education was imparted orally, and the children learnt a few verses from the Quran by rote. And indigenous education was widespread in the India in the 18th century, with a school for every temple, mosque, or village. Astronomy, metaphysics, ethics, medical sciences, and religion, etc. All were at under a same roof. And these schools were attended by students, a representative of all classes of society. And now we are discussing about the Japan education system, history, and their present time state. And if you are more interested in Japan's education system, so you can study the main article, that is the history of the education in Japan. And before you go into the history of the education, I want to say you about this. I want to ensure you about this, that Japan was one of the uh, one of the countries that was developed from scratch to a high and well powered economical power of the world. The history of the education in the Japan dates back at least to the 6th century, when the Chinese learning was introduced at the Yamato court. Foreign civilizations have often provided new ideas for the development of Japan's own culture. Chinese teachings and ideas followed into Japan from the 6th to the 99th century. Along with the introduction of the Buddhism, came the Chinese system of writing about the literacy tradition and Confucianism. By the ninth century, the Exogenous Kaio, also known as Kyoto, the empirical capital, and the uh, institutions of the higher learnings. And during the remainder of the Heian period, other schools were established by the nobility and the empirical court. During the medieval period, Zen Buddhist monastics was especially important centers of the learning. And the Ashoka schools, the Ashoka's Gado flourished in the 19th 15th century as a center of the higher learning. Now we are studying about the Central and and the South American civilization, and we will discuss about this Asiatic is a term used to refer to a certain ethnic group of the Central Mexico, and particularly those groups who spoke the Natholian language, who achieved political and military dominance over large parts of the Morocco in the 14th, 15th, and 16th century, a period of the referred to as the late post-classic period in the chronology. Until the age of the 14, the education of the children was in hands of their parents, but supposed by the authorities of their Kalpoli. Part of the education involved learning a collection of the servings called the multi savings of the old, and embodied by the Aztec idols, uh, judged by their language. Most of the hierarchical seemed to have evolved over several centuries, predating the exotics and most likely adopted from other how culture. And this was all about the American and the Central and South American civilization education system. I hope you will like this